The three suns of Velthury Prime rose slowly over the research domes. Painting the sky in shades of gold and purple, the Commander Alara Vance had grown to love over her 2 years on this quiet world. She stood on the observation deck with a cup of bitter colony coffee in her hands, watching the light spread across the valleys, below where 3 different species had built something beautiful. Together, the Kethri, with their bright feathers and hollow bones, had constructed elegant towers that caught the wind and sang soft melodies throughout the day. The Morval, with their smooth amphibian skin, had dug deep pools and waterways that connected every building like silver threads, and the humans, the smallest group of all, had built bridges between everyone else. Alara was supposed to be a military attaché, but the title meant almost nothing here on this peaceful colony world. There were no enemies to fight, no borders to defend, number wars to win. The Kethri ambassador had even suggested politely that she might leave her sidearm in her quarters, because it made some of the children nervous. She had smiled and agreed to keep it hidden, but she never stopped carrying it. Old habits died hard, and some lessons were written in scar tissue that never fully healed. Her real job, the one she had chosen for herself, was teaching self-defense classes to the colony children. Every species sent their young ones to learn at the education complex on the Eastern Ridge. And twice a week, Alara would show them how to throw a punch, how to break a grip, how to run and hide and survive. The Kethri fledglings, with their soft developing feathers, would practice pecking strikes with their beaks. The Marval tadpoles in their little hydration suits would learn to use their slippery skin to escape holds, and the handful of human children on the exchange program would giggle and tumble and treat the whole thing like a game that was fine with Alara. She hoped they would never need to use what she taught them. She hoped violence would remain a game to them forever. Her communicator buzzed with a message from her friend ChHFY, the elderly Kethri female who served as head teacher at the education complex. The message was simple. The children were asking when their next defense class would be, and young Tethik the Morval wanted to know if he could practice his galactic standard pronunciation with her again. Alara smiled and typed a reply, promising to visit that afternoon. She had no way of knowing that afternoon would never come. The first warning was a flicker in the sky, like stars appearing in daylight where no stars should be. Then the communication arrays went dead all at once, cutting the colony off from the rest of the galaxy in a single silent moment. Alara felt the coffee cup slip from her fingers before she even understood why. Her body knew danger before her mind caught up, and by the time the cup shattered on the deck, she was already running toward the command center. The officer on duty was a young Kethri male whose feathers had gone flat with terror. He pointed at the sensor display with a trembling wing, and Alara felt her blood turn to ice. Ships were dropping out of hyperspace above the colony, dozens of them in attack formation, and their signatures matched vessels that should not exist anymore. The Sketh Dominion had been pushed back decades ago, their slave empire shattered by a coalition of free worlds, their remnants scattered to the dark edges of known space. But the ships above Velthury Prime were definitely Sketh, and they were definitely preparing to attack. "Get a message out," Alara ordered, her voice cutting through the young officer's panic like a blade. "Use everything we have. Bounce it off every relay. But get word to the fleet. The jammers," he started to say. "Find a way around them," she interrupted, already calculating distances and times in her head. The colony's single defense turret was designed to handle small pirate raids, not a full invasion fleet. When the first orbital strike reduced it to molten slag, she felt no surprise at all. The command center shook with the impact. And then the fragmentary reports started coming in. Dropships were landing near the main colony center. Sketh soldiers in heavy armor were pouring out, stunning civilians and dragging them toward transport vessels. and a second group of dropships was heading toward the eastern ridge. Toward the education complex, where over 200 children of 3 species were gathered for their morning lessons. Alara understood immediately what was happening. The Sketh were slavers, and slave markets paid triple for the young. They were not here to conquer the colony. They were here to harvest it. A broken transmission crackled through the damaged communication system. The voice of the colony administrator, barely audible through the static. All personnel. The main colony is under assault. Repeat, under assault. We cannot send reinforcements to outlying areas. All personnel must shelter in place and protect. The transmission cut off in a burst of white noise. Alara stood very still for exactly 3 seconds. She thought about the children in the education complex. The fledgling Kethri, whose feathers had not yet grown strong enough for flight. The Morval tadplings who would die without their hydration suits. The human children who had come to this world to learn about peace and friendship between species. She thought about ChHFY with her gentle voice and her patient wisdom. She thought about little Tethik, practicing his pronunciation, trying so hard to get the sound right. Then she checked her sidearm, confirmed it was fully charged with 40 rounds, and started running toward the eastern ridge behind her. The young Kethri officer called out, asking where she was going, what she planned to do. She did not answer him. She did not have time for words. The dropships were already descending toward the education complex, like dark birds of prey. And Alara had perhaps 10 minutes to cover ground that should take 20. She ran anyway, her boots pounding against the colony paths, her heart hammering against her ribs, her mind already planning defensive positions and tactical options in all the desperate ways one human might hold back an army. The colonists she passed stared at her with confusion and fear. But she had no time to explain. She could only run and hope, and prepare herself for what was coming above her. The first Sketh dropship began its landing sequence on the eastern ridge, in the education complex. 200 children were about to learn that the galaxy was not always kind, and between them and the monsters that wanted to take them stood only one human woman with a pistol. A lifetime of hard-won skills, and a simple stubborn refusal to let the darkness win. Alara ran faster. The children were waiting, and she would not let them down. The education complex was chaos when Alara burst through the main doors, her lungs burning and her legs screaming from the desperate sprint across the colony. Children were crying in a dozen different languages and frequencies, some too high for human ears to hear and some too low, but all of them carrying the same terrible sound of fear. Teachers rushed between groups of students, trying to calm them, trying to organize them, trying to pretend that everything would be fine when the distant thunder of landing dropships proved that nothing would be fine at all. ChHFY stood at the center of the main hall, her old feathers ruffled with stress, but her voice steady as she called out instructions. When she saw Alara enter, her ancient eyes went wide with something that might have been hope or might have been confusion. "Commander Vance," she said, using Alara's formal title for the first time in months. "What is happening out there?" Alara did not waste time with gentle explanations. "Sketh slavers," she said, and watched the word hit ChHFY like a physical blow. "They are here for the children, and they will be at these doors in minutes." The teachers nearby heard her words, and the panic in their eyes grew sharper. A young Morval instructor started to hyperventilate, the gills on his neck fluttering wildly. One of the human teachers grabbed a group of children and looked around desperately for somewhere to run. "Listen to me," Alara said, and something in her voice made everyone stop and turn. This was not the gentle human who taught their students how to throw a punch. This was not the quiet woman who smiled at their jokes and helped the little ones practice their language skills. This was something else entirely, something forged in fire and blood, and years of fighting in places these peaceful colonists could not imagine. There are old mining tunnels beneath this building, Alara continued, her mind racing through the colony maps she had studied out of habit when she first arrived. They were sealed decades ago, but the access hatch is in the basement storage room, and they lead to the mountains to the north. ChHFY nodded slowly, understanding beginning to dawn in her eyes. You want us to evacuate through the tunnels. I want you to take every child in this building and get them as far from here as possible. Alara said, the tunnels are your only chance. The head teacher looked at the main doors, then back at Alara, and asked the question that everyone was thinking. What about the Sketh? How do we stop them from following us? Alara met her eyes and did not look away. You do not stop them, she said quietly. I do. The silence that followed was broken only by the crying of children and the growing rumble of Sketh ground vehicles approaching the complex. ChHFY shook her head, her feathers bristling with denial. You cannot be serious, she said. One human against an entire Sketh assault force. That is not a plan. That is suicide. It is the only option we have, Alara replied, already scanning the hall for furniture that could be moved, doorways that could be blocked, positions that could be defended. Someone needs to make them believe everyone is still in this building. Someone needs to buy you time to get the children to safety. And I am the only one here with the training to do it. A small voice interrupted them, and Alara looked down to see Tethik standing beside her. The young Morval's large dark eyes were wet with tears. But he was not running or hiding like many of the other children. He was looking up at her with the same trust he showed when she helped him practice his pronunciation. Commander Alara, he said in his careful, practiced Galactic standard. Are you afraid? Alara knelt down to his level, ignoring the pounding of her heart and the countdown running in her head. She put one hand on his small shoulder and felt how fragile he was beneath his hydration suit. Yes, she told him honestly. I am very afraid. Then why are you staying? He asked. She thought about the question for a moment, searching for words simple enough for a child to understand. Because being scared and being brave are not opposites. She finally said, sometimes being brave means doing the scary thing anyway. Because it is the right thing to do, because someone has to do it, because the people we love are worth protecting. Tethik nodded slowly, as if this made perfect sense to him. Then he reached into the pocket of his hydration suit and pulled out a small smooth stone. The guy and the Morval children collected from the colony streams. For luck, he said, pressing it into her palm. Alara closed her fingers around the stone and tucked it into her pocket next to her spare power cells. Thank you, she said, and meant it more than he could know. ChHFY had used the time to organize the teachers, and now they were moving with purpose, gathering children into groups and heading for the basement access. Some of the older students helped carry the younger ones, and the human teachers took charge of the Morval tadplings, whose hydration suits made them slower than the rest. Within minutes, the main hall was emptying, the flood of small bodies flowing toward the basement stairs like water finding its way downhill. Alara watched them go while she worked, dragging heavy tables to create barriers, dimming lights to create shadows, checking sightlines and choke points, and all the deadly mathematics of urban combat. When the last group of children reached the basement stairs, ChHFY paused at the doorway and looked back. How long can you hold them? She asked. Alara did not know the answer to that question, so she gave the only answer that mattered. Long enough, she said. Now go, and do not open that tunnel door for anyone except rescue forces. Do you understand? The old Kethri hesitated, and for a moment, Alara thought she might argue or refuse or try to stay. Then ChHFY bowed her head in the formal gesture of her people, a show of deep respect that was usually reserved for warriors and heroes. May the winds carry you home, she said, and then she was gone. The basement door closing behind her, Alara waited until she heard the distant sound of the tunnel hatch opening and closing. Then she walked to the main doors and sealed them from the inside, the heavy locks clicking into place with a sound like fate. Through the windows, she could see the Sketh ground forces approaching. 40 soldiers in heavy armor walking in a loose formation, their weapons held casually at their sides. They were laughing. She realized she could see it in the way they moved, confident and relaxed, expecting nothing but easy prey and helpless victims. They had no idea what was waiting for them inside this building. Alara checked her pistol one final time, 40 rounds against 40 enemies, and felt something cold and quiet settle into her bones. The fear was still there, but it was distant now, locked away behind walls of training and purpose and a fierce protective fury that burned brighter than any fear could reach. She took her position behind an overturned table, steadied her breathing, and watched the Sketh formation reach the main doors. "Come on then," she whispered into the darkness. "Let me show you what humans are made of." The Sketh breached the main doors with a controlled explosion that sent fragments of metal and glass spraying across the darkened hall. They expected screaming children and cowering teachers, easy targets to be stunned and collected. Like harvest from a field, instead they found silence and shadows in a darkness so complete that even their helmet sensors struggled to find clear targets. The first soldier through the door died before he could take 3 steps, a single precise shot from somewhere in the black dropping him where he stood. Second soldier made it 2 steps further before another shot found the gap between his helmet and his chest armor. By the time the third and fourth soldiers fell, the Sketh had realized that something was very wrong. Spread out, their squad leader ordered through their communication network, "Use thermal scanning and find whoever is doing this." They activated their helmet lights and thermal sensors, flooding the hall with harsh white beams that cut through the darkness. What they found made no sense to them at all. A single human woman crouched behind an overturned table, already moving to a new position before their weapons could track her. A human, the weakest species in the sector, the soft-skinned, short-lived, fragile creatures that every other race pitied and protected. Surely this was some kind of mistake. The squad leader laughed and gave the order to advance, certain that 40 armed Sketh could handle one pathetic human defender. He was wrong. Alara fought like nothing the Sketh had ever encountered, not because she was faster or stronger or better equipped than they were, but because she had spent a lifetime learning how to kill things that were faster and stronger and better equipped than she was. She used the building itself as a weapon, triggering fire suppression systems that filled corridors with thick white foam and blinded Sketh soldiers who relied on their sensors. She used the emergency doors to separate squads, isolating small groups and picking them off before their companions could reach them. She used the children's art supplies to create improvised flashbangs, mixing chemicals in ways her military training had taught her and her enemies had never imagined. When a Sketh soldier cornered her in a classroom, she dropped from the ceiling vents onto his back and drove a piece of broken furniture through the gap in his armor before he could react. When 3 more soldiers tried to flank her through the gymnasium, she led them into a storage closet rigged with pressurized cleaning tanks that exploded when she shot them from across the room. Every trick she knew, every dirty tactic she had learned in the border wars, every desperate measure that had kept her alive when she should have died a dozen times over. She used them all, and still the Sketh kept coming, and still she kept killing them. And still the minutes ticked by while somewhere below her feet the children moved through dark tunnels toward safety. The first wound came from a blast that grazed her shoulder, burning through her uniform and leaving a stripe of agony across her skin. The second wound came from a shot that caught her leg when she was too slow ducking behind cover, and suddenly every step she took left a trail of blood on the floor. The third wound came from a soldier who got close enough to club her with his rifle before she could put him down. And she felt something crack in her ribs that made breathing a new kind of torture. But she did not stop. She could not stop. Every second she kept fighting was another second the children had to escape. Another meter of distance between them and the monsters who wanted to steal them away. The Sketh commander watched from outside the building as his soldiers reported in with increasing frustration and fear. 6 soldiers down, then 10, then 15. And still the fighting continued inside. He demanded to know what they were facing. What kind of force had been hidden in this supposed civilian education center? The answer came back in confused and terrified fragments. One human. Just one human. A female with a pistol and a seemingly endless supply of tricks and traps and pure stubborn refusal to die. Impossible, the commander snarled. Humans are prey animals. They do not fight like this. But his soldiers were dying anyway. And the reports kept coming. And somewhere in that building a single human woman was making a mockery of everything the Sketh believed about the galaxy inside the complex. Elara found herself driven from position to position as the Sketh adapted to her tactics and pressed their advantage in numbers. Her pistol ran empty, and she took a rifle from a fallen soldier. The alien weapon heavy and awkward in her human hands, but still capable of sending Sketh to whatever afterlife awaited them. Her shoulder screamed with every movement. Her leg threatened to buckle with every step. Her broken ribs stabbed at her lungs with every breath. But she kept moving, kept fighting, kept killing. The Sketh found the basement door. Elara heard them calling it in over the communication frequency she had been monitoring. Heard them report that they were cutting through the locks. Heard them laugh about the prey that had tried to hide in the tunnels. She looked at the rifle in her hands, checked the charge, calculated the distance between her current position and the basement stairs. There were still 23 Sketh soldiers in the building, and she had maybe a dozen shots left in her stolen weapon. The numbers did not work. And she knew it, but the numbers had never worked. Not from the moment she had decided to stay behind. And that had not stopped her yet. She triggered the building's emergency beacon, sending a distress signal on every frequency she could reach, hoping that someone somewhere would hear it and send help. Then she stepped out into the open atrium where the Sketh could see her. 23 helmeted heads turned toward her at once. 23 weapons rose to aim at the battered, bleeding human woman who stood swaying in a shaft of light from the shattered ceiling. Behind her was the stairway to the basement, to the tunnel, to the children. She raised her rifle with arms that shook from exhaustion and pain, and looked at the soldiers who had come to steal innocence from the universe. "You want those children," she said, and her voice echoed through the silent hall despite its roughness. Despite the blood in her throat, "Come and take them." The Sketh opened fire, and Elara Vance showed them what humanity meant when something precious was at stake. The blaster fire fell like rain around Elara as she dove behind a pillar. Bolts of energy scorching the air where she had stood a heartbeat before 23 Sketh soldiers fired at once. And the wall behind her exploded into fragments of stone and metal that cut her face and hands. She returned fire without aiming, more to buy time than to hit anything, and heard a satisfying scream as one of her shots found its mark. Through pure luck or fate or whatever force watched over desperate fools who fought against impossible odds. Then she was moving again, rolling behind fallen furniture, limping through doorways, always keeping herself between the Sketh and the basement stairs. They adapted quickly now. These slavers who had finally learned to take her seriously, they moved in coordinated teams, covering each other's advances, using suppressing fire to pin her down while flankers circled around. But Elara had been fighting wars since before some of these soldiers were born, and she knew the rhythms of violence like a dancer knew music. She anticipated their movements, predicted their tactics, stayed one step ahead, even as her body screamed for rest and her vision began to blur at the edges. Her rifle clicked empty. She threw it at the nearest soldier's face and charged him while he flinched, driving her fist into the soft tissue beneath his chin guard with all the strength she had left. His head snapped back and he fell, and she grabbed his weapon before his body hit the ground. 3 soldiers rushed her at once, too fast for her to bring the new rifle up in time. She blocked the first one's swing with her forearm and felt bones crack. Not his, but hers, pain flaring white-hot up to her shoulder. She used his body as a shield when the second one fired. The blast meant for her burning through his back instead. The third soldier tackled her to the ground and raised his weapon for a point-blank shot, and she drove her thumb into his eye with enough force to reach something soft and vital beneath. He screamed and fell away, and she was up again, stumbling but still standing, still fighting, still refusing to fall down in the tunnels, far from the sounds of battle. ChHFY led the children through darkness with only emergency lights to guide them. The little ones had stopped crying, exhausted by fear into a numb silence that was somehow worse than tears. The older students helped carry those who could not walk fast enough, and the teachers moved among them, offering whispered comfort that fooled no one. Tethik walked near the front of the group, his large Morval eyes seeing better in the dark than most of the others. He kept looking back toward the tunnel entrance they had left behind, listening for sounds that did not come. Is Commander Alara going to be okay? He asked ChHFY for the 3rd time. The old Kethri did not answer immediately. She thought about the human woman she had known for 2 years. The quiet, gentle presence who taught children how to protect themselves and helped young aliens practice their language skills. She thought about the transformation she had witnessed in the education complex. The moment when that gentle woman had become something ancient and terrible and magnificent. I used to think humans were fragile, ChHFY finally said, as much to herself as to the child. They live such short lives. They break so easily. They lack the natural weapons that other species possess. She paused, searching for the right words. I think I understand now that I had it backwards all along. Tethik looked up at her with confusion in his dark eyes. What do you mean? Humans fight so hard precisely because they know how precious life is. ChHFY said softly. They do not have centuries to waste. So every moment matters to them in ways we long-lived species forget. Every person they love is irreplaceable. Every child is a miracle worth dying for. She looked back toward the distant sounds of violence that occasionally echoed through the tunnels. Commander Alara is doing what humans do when something precious is threatened. She is reminding the universe why her species survived long enough to reach the stars. Back in the education complex, Alara was down to her last few shots and her body was failing her faster than her will. The Sketh commander had finally entered the building himself. Tired of watching his soldiers die to a single human defender, he was larger than the others, his armor decorated with the marks of 100 conquered worlds, his movements carrying the confidence of someone who had never found a species he could not break. He found Alara slumped against the basement door, barely conscious, still holding a weapon in hands that were more blood than skin. She had killed 31 of his soldiers, more than half his entire force, and she looked like a corpse that had forgotten to stop breathing. Why? The commander demanded. Genuinely curious despite his rage. Why die for aliens? Why sacrifice yourself for children that are not even your own species? What could possibly be worth this? Alara looked up at him with eyes that burned like dying stars. Because someone has to, she said. And her voice was a ruin, but the words were clear. Because they are children. Because they deserve a chance to grow up and see the galaxy, and become whatever they are meant to become. She coughed and blood flecked her lips. But she did not look away from the commander's face. Because I can, she continued. Because I am the one who is here. Because my life is a small price for 200 futures. She raised her weapon with a hand that would not stop shaking. and because you are still standing between me and them. I'm not done yet. The commander was faster. He shot the weapon from her hand with casual precision, then stepped forward and backhanded her across the face with enough force to shatter her collarbone. She fell hard and did not get up. Could not get up, her body finally surrendering to damage that should have killed her an hour ago. He stood over her, weapon raised for the killing blow, and hesitated. Something in her eyes stopped him. Some quality that he had never seen in any of his countless victims. There was no surrender there. No plea for mercy, no acceptance of defeat. There was only a patient, terrible certainty that even dying, even broken beyond repair, she would find some way to hurt him if he gave her the chance, for the first time in his long career of conquest. The Sketh commander felt something like doubt. Then a new sound cut through the silence of the ruined building. A sound that made his blood run cold, engines screaming through atmosphere. Weapons charging with a distinctive whine that every spacer recognized. And a voice broadcasting on all frequencies. This is the combined fleet vessel Adamantine to all Sketh forces. You are engaged. Repeat. You are engaged. Surrender immediately or be destroyed. Alara smiled with broken lips and blood-stained teeth. The beacon, she whispered. Someone heard the beacon. The commander stared at her in disbelief. And in that moment he finally understood what kind of creature he had been fighting. Not a soldier. Not a warrior. Not a champion of any great cause. Just a human. Small and fragile and impossibly stubborn, who had decided that some things were worth dying for, and then refused to die until the job was done above the colony. The Adamantine began its attack run, and the Sketh fleet that had seemed so invincible started to burn in the education complex. The commander looked at the human woman at his feet and knew that he had lost everything to her. 200 children would escape. Because of her, his soldiers had died. Because of her, his mission had failed because of her. And she lay there broken and bleeding and smiling. Because she had won. The Marines from the Adamantine found a scene that would become legend throughout the known galaxy. 34 Sketh soldiers lay dead in the education complex. Scattered through hallways and classrooms in the great atrium where the final stand had taken place, the walls were scorched with weapons fire. The floors slick with blood, both red and alien. The air thick with smoke and the smell of violence and air. Slumped against the basement door, with her broken body positioned between the enemy and the children, even in unconsciousness, was one human woman. The medics reached her first and immediately began working with the desperate speed of people who knew they were fighting against time. Her wounds were catastrophic. The kind of damage that should have killed her a dozen times over. Yet somehow her heart still beat and her lungs still drew breath. How? Is she still alive? One of the medics whispered as they loaded her onto the emergency stretcher. The Marine captain had no answer for that question. He had seen the Sketh commander being led away in restraints. Had heard the slaver asking the same thing over and over. What was she? What kind of enhanced soldier? What special forces operative could do what she had done? The captain checked the colony records and felt something twist in his chest. She was a diplomatic attach, he told his soldiers, his voice quiet with awe. A ceremonial posting after medical discharge from active service. Her main duty was teaching self-defense classes to children. The Marines looked at the carnage around them, at the impossible evidence of what one human had done against overwhelming odds. And not one of them could find words to speak in the mountain caves where the tunnels emerged. ChHFY kept the children calm until the rescue shuttles arrived, when the soldiers told them what had happened, what Commander Alara had done to keep them safe. The children fell silent with a different kind of awe than their fear had been young. Tethik pushed to the front of the group and asked the question burning in his heart. Is she going to be okay? The soldier who answered him was honest because the children deserved honesty. She is hurt very badly. he said, kneeling to meet the young Morville's eyes. "The doctors are doing everything they can. But it will be a long time before we know for certain." Tethek nodded slowly, processing this information with the strange resilience that children sometimes show in the face of terrible things. "She gave me a stone for luck before she left," he said. "I want to give her something back when she wakes up. I want her to know that we remember what she did for us." The soldier put a gentle hand on the child's shoulder and promised to make sure any gifts reached the human woman who had saved them all. Weeks passed before Alara woke in the medical bay of a fleet hospital station. More machine than flesh keeping her alive while her body slowly remembered how to heal. Her first words were not about her pain or her condition or the long recovery that waited ahead. Her first words were a question. Did the children make it? When the doctors told her that all 212 children had escaped through the tunnels, that not a single one had been captured or harmed. Alara closed her eyes and wept. The tears were not from pain, though she had plenty of that. They were tears of relief so profound that they washed away everything else. Every wound and scar and nightmare that had brought her to this moment. She had done it. She had kept them safe. The galaxy did not forget what happened on Volturi Prime. The colony rebuilt itself stronger than before. And in the courtyard of the new education complex, they erected a statue that would stand for centuries. It showed a human woman, neither beautiful nor imposing. Just an ordinary person in ordinary clothes standing firm against an unseen threat. The plaque beneath it was written in 17 different languages. Every tongue spoken by every species who called the colony home. The words were simple. She stood alone so that we would not fall together. Months after the attack, when Alara had healed enough to walk again, though she would never be fully whole, she returned to Volturi Prime at the children's request. They gathered in the rebuilt main hall of the education complex. Hundreds of them now, because word had spread and families had come from across the sector to see the place where a human had become a legend. When Alara entered, leaning on a cane she hated but could not yet abandon, the children swarmed her with the careful enthusiasm of young ones who had been told to be gentle with their hero. They brought her cards they had made and drawings they had created in small gifts that meant everything because they came from hearts full of gratitude. Tethek approached shyly, holding a piece of paper that he had clearly worked on for a long time. "I drew what you look like," he said, presenting the picture with formal Morville courtesy. "In my head, when you told us you would keep us safe." Alara looked at the drawing and felt her breath catch in her throat. The image showed a small human figure surrounded by golden light, arms spread wide, holding back a wave of darkness that could not pass her in the child's art. She did not look wounded or desperate or afraid. She looked like something out of legend, like hope given form, like the reason why children could still believe that heroes were real. "Is that really how you see me?" she asked. Her voice rough with emotion. Tethek tilted his head in the way of his people, confused by the question. "That is how you are," he said simply, as if stating an obvious truth. "Did you not know?" Alara looked at the drawing for a long moment. This image of herself as something greater than a broken soldier with too many scars and too many ghosts. Then she carefully folded the paper and tucked it against her heart where it would stay for the rest of her life in the Galactic Archives. Under the entry for humanity, a new citation was added that year. It read, "Threat assessment requires revision. Do not engage near that which they protect." But for Alara, standing in a room full of children who saw her as the light that held back darkness, the words that mattered most were much simpler. She had been asked why she stayed behind to face impossible odds. She had answered, because someone has to, looking at the faces around her, at the futures she had bought with her blood and her pain and her stubborn human refusal to stop fighting. She finally understood the full truth of those words. Someone has to, and sometimes that someone is you. And when you choose to be that person, you become something more than you were. You become the reason why children can still believe that when the monsters come, someone will stand between them and the darkness. You become hope, and hope, as Alara had learned, was the most human thing of all.